The crack of a gunshot split the silence as Henrietta Cole clutched the edge of the carriage window, her heart pounding against her corset like a wild stallion. It was 1875 in the Arizona Territory, and her life was unraveling faster than a cheap spool of thread. The mountains in the distance shimmered in the heat, mocking her desperate situation with their unchanging beauty while her world collapsed around her. "Keep your head inside, girl," snapped her stepfather, Bartholomew, pulling her roughly away from the window. "Your future husband paid good money for you, and I won't have you ruining that pretty face before he sees it." Henrietta's fingers trembled as she smoothed down the expensive silk dress that felt more like a burial shroud than a traveling outfit. At 22, she had always imagined she would marry for love, not be sold off to a man 3 times her age to settle her stepfather's gambling debts. "Mother, please," she whispered to the woman sitting across from her, whose once vibrant eyes now held only resignation. "Don't let him do this." "It's for the best, Henrietta," her mother replied, not meeting her gaze. "Mr. Donovan is wealthy. You'll want for nothing." "Except my freedom," Henrietta muttered, earning a sharp glare from Bartholomew. The carriage jolted over the rough terrain, each bump bringing her closer to Willow Creek and the mansion where Maxwell Donovan awaited his bride. She had met him only once, when he had visited their modest ranch to finalize the arrangement with her stepfather. His cold eyes had appraised her like livestock at auction, and his yellowed smile had made her skin crawl. "2 more days," Bartholomew said, checking his pocket watch. "Then you'll be Mrs. Donovan, and our debts will be settled." Henrietta turned back to the window, blinking away tears as she watched the sparse desert landscape roll by. Somewhere in the distance, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, little more than a speck against the vast emptiness. She found herself wondering what it would be like to ride so freely, to choose one's own direction without the constraints of societal expectations or familial obligations. Miles away, Jake Pierce tightened the cinch on his saddle and patted his horse's neck. The dappled gray stallion, Thunder, snorted impatiently, eager to continue their journey. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, pushing back his worn Stetson to wipe the sweat from his brow. At 28, he had spent the last decade of his life on the move, working ranches across the territory and building a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in the West. His latest job had taken him to the Curtis Ranch near Willow Creek, where he was to break and train a string of wild Mustangs for the wealthy rancher. Jake mounted Thunder and nudged him forward, following the trail that would lead them to the Curtis property. The sun beat down mercilessly, but he was accustomed to the harsh conditions of the frontier. His tanned skin and calloused hands were testament to years of hard work under the unforgiving sky. As he rode, his thoughts drifted to the rumors he had heard in the last town. Maxwell Donovan, the richest man in Willow Creek and a notoriously cruel businessman, was importing a bride from back east. Jake had crossed paths with Donovan once before, when the man had tried to buy Thunder from him for an insulting price. When Jake refused, Donovan had attempted to have the horse stolen, a plan that was thwarted only by Jake's vigilance and quick draw. The incident had earned Jake an enemy, but he cared little for Donovan's enmity. There were more important things in life than wealth and power, like honor and freedom. He pitied the poor woman who was being brought to marry such a man. Little did Jake know how soon their paths would cross. The carriage carrying Henrietta made slow progress through the rugged terrain. By evening, they had reached a small way station where travelers could rest for the night. Bartholomew secured a room for himself and his wife, while Henrietta was locked in a separate, sparse chamber with a single narrow bed and a washstand. "No tricks," Bartholomew warned as he turned the key. "We leave at first light." Alone at last, Henrietta allowed her tears to fall freely. She moved to the window, pushing it open to let in the cool night air. The stars hung like diamonds in the vast sky, and for a moment, she lost herself in their beauty. "I will not marry him," she whispered to the darkness. "I would rather die." But even as she spoke the words, she knew escape was nearly impossible. She had no money, no horse, and nowhere to go in this unfamiliar territory. Her only hope was to somehow delay the journey or find help along the way. With this resolve, she finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of freedom. Jake arrived at the way station just as the sun dipped below the horizon. He stabled Thunder and secured a small room for the night. The common room was buzzing with conversation, and he ordered a simple meal of beans and cornbread, listening to the chatter around him. "Heard Donovan's bride is arriving tomorrow," said a grizzled miner at the next table. "Poor thing doesn't know what she's in for. Last woman who crossed him ended up dead within a year." Jake's fork paused midway to his mouth. "What do you mean?" The miner leaned in, lowering his voice. "His first wife. Official story is she fell down the stairs, but my cousin worked at that house. Said he heard the arguments, saw the bruises before she died." A chill ran down Jake's spine. He had known Donovan was unpleasant, but this was far worse than he had imagined. And no one did anything? Who'd go against Donovan? Man owns half the county and has the law in his pocket. Jake finished his meal in thoughtful silence. As he made his way back to his room, he passed a closed door from which he heard muffled sobbing. He paused, then continued on, troubled by the sound but knowing it wasn't his place to interfere in a stranger's sorrow. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Henrietta was awakened by a rough knock on her door. "Up and dressed in 5 minutes," Bartholomew called. "We're leaving." Henrietta washed her face with cold water, erasing the evidence of her tears. She pinned her honey-colored hair into a simple style and donned the same traveling dress from the day before. When she emerged from the room, Bartholomew grabbed her arm and marched her to the waiting carriage. "No breakfast?" she asked, her stomach rumbling. "You can eat on the way. We're behind schedule." As they pulled away from the way station, Henrietta noticed a man leading a magnificent gray horse from the stables. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair visible beneath his hat. Something about his confident stance and the gentle way he handled his horse caught her attention. Their eyes met briefly as the carriage passed, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest. Jake watched the carriage depart, struck by the young woman's haunted expression in the window. There was a sadness in her amber eyes that resonated with him, though he couldn't say why. He mounted Thunder and set out on the trail, putting the encounter out of his mind as he focused on the day's journey ahead. Hours later, Henrietta's carriage had made good progress, following the road that wound through a narrow canyon. The driver, a taciturn man named Garrett who had been hired specifically for this journey, kept the horses at a steady pace despite the increasingly difficult terrain. "How much longer until we reach Willow Creek?" Henrietta asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the carriage. "We'll be there by tomorrow afternoon," Bartholomew replied. "Donovan has arranged a small ceremony for the following day. No sense in waiting once we arrive." Henrietta's stomach twisted with dread. "So soon? The sooner you're married, the sooner our debts are cleared," her stepfather said coldly. "You should be grateful. Many women would envy your position as wife to such a wealthy man." "Many women haven't met him," Henrietta retorted, earning a sharp slap from Bartholomew. "Mind your tongue, girl. Your attitude won't serve you well in your new home." Henrietta turned away, her cheeks stinging but her resolve strengthening. As the carriage rounded a bend in the canyon, she noticed something unusual ahead: a fallen tree blocking the narrow road. "What's the delay?" Bartholomew called to the driver as the carriage came to a halt. "Tree across the road, sir," Garrett replied. "Must have come down in that storm a few days back. I'll need to move it." Henrietta watched as Garrett and Bartholomew dismounted to inspect the obstacle. The tree was substantial, its branches spread across the entire width of the road. As the men discussed how to clear the path, Henrietta's mind raced. This could be her chance. While they were distracted, she quietly opened the door on the opposite side of the carriage and slipped out. Her mother was dozing in the corner and didn't stir. With her heart pounding, Henrietta gathered her skirts and darted into the underbrush at the side of the road, making her way deeper into the canyon. She had no plan beyond putting distance between herself and the carriage. The rough terrain tore at her dress and scratched her hands, but she pressed on, driven by desperation. Freedom, even temporary, was worth the discomfort. Jake was making good time along the trail that ran parallel to the main road. He preferred the less traveled paths, finding them more peaceful and often faster than the rutted thoroughfares used by wagons and carriages. As he rounded the bend in the canyon, he heard voices raised in anger. Curious, he guided Thunder toward the sound, emerging from the tree line to see a carriage stopped on the road below. Two men were frantically searching the surrounding area, while a woman stood by the carriage wringing her hands. "Find her! Damn it!" shouted the older man. "She can't have gotten far in those skirts." Jake watched for a moment, piecing together the situation. Someone had escaped the carriage, likely a woman, given the reference to skirts. The men's obvious anger suggested this wasn't a simple case of stretching legs during a journey delay. As he observed, he caught a flash of movement farther up the canyon, a glimpse of pale blue fabric among the rocks. The men hadn't seen it yet, but it was only a matter of time before they widened their search in that direction. Making a split-second decision, Jake urged Thunder down a game trail that would intercept the path of the fleeing woman. He wasn't sure what was happening, but his instincts told him something wasn't right, and he had learned long ago to trust those instincts. Henrietta stumbled over the uneven ground, her city-bred shoes ill-suited for the rocky terrain. She could hear Bartholomew and Garrett shouting behind her, and knew they would soon catch up. Her dress caught on a thorny bush, and as she tugged it free, she lost her footing and fell, sliding down a small embankment and landing hard at the bottom. Pain shot through her ankle, and she bit back a cry. Attempting to stand, she found she could barely put weight on the injured limb. Despair washed over her as she realized her escape attempt would be short-lived. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart sink further. They had mounted up to search for her. But as she pressed herself against the rock face, trying to remain hidden, she was surprised to see not Bartholomew or Garrett, but the stranger from the way station atop his magnificent gray horse. Jake spotted the woman huddled against the rocks, her blue dress torn and dirty, her face a mask of fear. He dismounted quickly and approached with his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked softly. Henrietta regarded him warily. "Who are you?" "Jake Pierce. I saw the commotion back at the road. Looked like you might be in trouble." "I'm—" She hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger. But his kind eyes and the gentle way he had spoken to his horse earlier gave her courage. "I'm Henrietta Cole. And yes, I'm in desperate trouble." Jake crouched down to her level. "You're hurt." "My ankle. I fell." She glanced nervously over his shoulder. "They'll be coming for me soon." "Who are they? And why are you running from them?" The words tumbled out in a rush. "My stepfather is forcing me to marry Maxwell Donovan to pay off his gambling debts. We're on our way to Willow Creek for the wedding." "I can't do it, Mr. Pierce. I've heard terrible things about Donovan, and Her voice broke. "I would rather take my chances in the wilderness than be that man's wife." Jake's expression darkened at the mention of Donovan's name. "I know Donovan. The rumors you've heard are likely true." The sound of voices echoed through the canyon, growing closer. Henrietta clutched Jake's arm. "Please, help me." Jake made his decision in an instant. "Can you ride?" "Yes, but my ankle." "I'll help you." He whistled softly, and Thunder approached, nickering quietly. "We need to move quickly." With gentle efficiency, Jake helped Henrietta onto Thunder's back, then swung up behind her. "Hold tight," he murmured, and turned the horse away from the voices, following a narrow path that led deeper into the canyon. Henrietta clung to the saddle horn, acutely aware of Jake's solid presence behind her. It was improper to be so close to a man she had just met, but propriety seemed a distant concern compared to the fate that awaited her with Donovan. "Where are we going?" she asked as they put distance between themselves and her pursuers. "I know a place where we can hide until dark. Then we'll decide what to do next." The sun was high in the sky as Jake guided Thunder through the winding canyon paths. He could feel Henrietta trembling against him, whether from fear, pain, or the impropriety of their situation, he wasn't sure. But he knew he couldn't leave her to the fate that awaited her at Donovan's hands. After riding for nearly an hour, they reached a secluded grotto hidden behind a stand of cottonwood trees. A small spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a shallow pool before continuing on as a narrow stream. Jake helped Henrietta dismount, supporting her weight as she tested her injured ankle. "Let's get you settled, and I'll take a look at that ankle." He spread his bedroll beneath the shade of a large boulder and helped her sit. Kneeling beside her, he gently removed her shoe and examined the swollen joint. "It's not broken, I think. Just a bad sprain. We should wrap it and keep it elevated." Henrietta watched as he tore a strip from his spare shirt and began to bind her ankle with practiced movements. "You seem skilled at this." When you work with horses, you learn a bit about treating injuries, he replied with a small smile. And I've had my share of sprains over the years. Once her ankle was wrapped, Jake fetched water from the spring and offered her his canteen. Drink slowly. I've got some jerky and hardtack in my saddlebags. Not much of a meal for a lady, but it'll keep your strength up. Henrietta accepted the simple fare gratefully. As they ate, she studied her rescuer. Jake Pierce was handsome in a rugged way, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark hair curled slightly where it escaped from beneath his hat, and there was a quiet strength in his movements that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally. "You don't know me. You could have just ridden past." Jake considered her question, taking a sip from his canteen before answering. "I've crossed paths with Donovan before. He's not a good man." And he hesitated, then continued. "No one should be forced into marriage, especially not to settle someone else's debts. It isn't right." "My stepfather doesn't share your sense of justice," Henrietta said bitterly. "He sees me as a commodity to be traded. What about your mother? Does she approve of this arrangement?" Henrietta's expression softened with sadness. "She hasn't approved or disapproved of anything since my father died 5 years ago. Bartholomew broke her spirit long ago. She does whatever he tells her now." "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly. "That can't have been easy for you." It wasn't. She looked down at her hands, dirty and scratched from her escape attempt. "But I've managed. Until now, at least. I don't know what to do next. I can't go back, but I have nowhere to go forward to. First things first," Jake said practically. "We need to put more distance between us and your stepfather. Once night falls, we'll head for the Curtis Ranch where I'm working. The owner, Samuel Curtis, is a good man. He might be willing to help you. And if he's not," Jake's expression was determined, "then we'll figure something else out. I won't let Donovan get his hands on you." The sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce." "Jake," he corrected with a small smile. "If we're going to be fugitives together, you might as well use my given name." "Jake," she repeated, returning his smile. "And I'm Henrietta, though my friends called me Hattie before." "Hattie," he said, and the name sounded right coming from his lips. "It suits you." They passed the afternoon in the shaded grotto, taking turns watching for any sign of pursuit. Jake tended to Thunder, ensuring the horse was rested and watered for the journey ahead. Henrietta dozed fitfully, her dreams troubled by images of Bartholomew's rage and Donovan's cold smile. She awoke to Jake's gentle touch on her shoulder. "It's nearly dusk," he said. "We should get moving soon." Henrietta sat up, wincing as she moved her ankle. The pain had subsided somewhat, but it was still tender. "I'm ready." As Jake helped her to her feet, the distant sound of voices echoed through the canyon. His expression tensed. "They're closer than I thought. They must have picked up our trail." Henrietta's heart raced. "What do we do?" Jake quickly gathered his belongings, strapping them to Thunder's saddle. "Change of plans. We need to move now, and we need to be clever about it. The main road to Willow Creek runs through this canyon. They'll expect us to avoid it. So we take it?" Henrietta asked, understanding his strategy. "No, that's too risky. But we'll cross it, then double back along the ridge. It might throw them off our trail long enough to reach the Curtis Ranch." He helped Henrietta onto Thunder's back, then mounted behind her. As they set off, the voices grew louder, accompanied by the sound of horses moving through the underbrush. "They've brought more men," Henrietta whispered, fear evident in her voice. "Hold tight," Jake murmured, urging Thunder into a faster pace. The gray stallion responded beautifully, picking his way sure-footedly through the gathering darkness. They emerged from the trees near the main road, Jake scanning the area carefully before guiding Thunder across. Just as they reached the other side, a shout rang out. "There they are!" Jake cursed under his breath as he spotted 3 riders on the road about 100 yards away: Bartholomew, Garrett, and a third man he didn't recognize. "Hold on," he called to Henrietta, and drove his heels into Thunder's flanks. The stallion leapt forward, racing up the slope toward the ridge above the canyon. Behind them, the 3 men spurred their mounts in pursuit. Shots rang out, bullets whizzing harmlessly overhead, meant to intimidate rather than harm. "They're shooting at us," Henrietta gasped, clinging desperately to the saddle. "They won't risk hitting you," Jake replied grimly. "Donovan wants you unharmed." Thunder was a powerful horse, but the steep terrain and double burden were taking their toll. Jake could feel the stallion's strides beginning to shorten, his breathing becoming labored. They couldn't maintain this pace for long. As they crested the ridge, Jake spotted a narrow trail leading down the other side into a dense grove of trees. He guided Thunder onto it, hoping the cover would provide some protection from their pursuers. The trail wound through the trees, barely visible in the fading light. Jake relied on Thunder's instincts to navigate the treacherous path, while keeping his attention on the sounds of pursuit behind them. Suddenly, the trail opened onto a wider track, a logging road that cut through the forest. Jake hesitated, unsure which way to turn. The wrong choice could lead them into a dead end or back toward their pursuers. Which way? Henrietta asked, sensing his uncertainty. Before Jake could answer, the sound of an approaching wagon reached them. Lights appeared around the bend in the road, a lantern swaying from the front of a heavily laden lumber wagon heading toward them. Off the road, Jake hissed, guiding Thunder into the trees just as the wagon came into view. They watched from hiding as it rumbled past, driven by a bearded man smoking a pipe. As soon as the wagon had passed, Jake had a sudden inspiration. "Wait here," he whispered, helping Henrietta dismount. He led Thunder a short distance into the trees and secured him to a branch. "Stay with him. I'll be right back." Before Henrietta could protest, Jake was moving swiftly back toward the road. She watched anxiously as he disappeared into the gathering darkness, the sounds of the wagon fading in the distance. Minutes that felt like hours passed. Henrietta strained her ears for any sound of their pursuers, but the forest was quiet except for the normal noises of nightfall, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Just as she was beginning to fear the worst, Jake reappeared, his face flushed with exertion. "Come on," he said urgently. "I've bought us some time, but we need to move." He helped her mount Thunder once more and led the horse deeper into the forest, following a barely visible game trail. "What did you do?" Henrietta asked. "I paid the wagon driver to tell anyone who asks that he saw a man and woman heading west on the logging road. With luck, they'll follow that false trail while we head north to the Curtis Ranch." Henrietta marveled at his quick thinking. That was clever. "Let's hope it works," Jake replied, his expression grim. Donovan isn't a man to give up easily, especially when his pride is at stake. They traveled through the night, moving slowly to spare Thunder and to avoid hazards in the darkness. Henrietta dozed occasionally, leaning back against Jake's chest, secure in his steady presence despite the danger that surrounded them. Dawn found them emerging from the forest into rolling grassland. In the distance, Henrietta could see a cluster of buildings, a ranch house, barn, and outbuildings nestled against the backdrop of the mountains. "The Curtis Ranch," Jake explained. "We should be safe there, at least for a while." As they approached, a rider came out to meet them, a young man on a chestnut gelding, carrying a rifle across his saddle. "That's Tom, Samuel Curtis's son," Jake said. "He's a good kid." Tom recognized Jake and lowered his rifle, his expression curious as he took in Henrietta's disheveled appearance and their obvious fatigue. "Jake, wasn't expecting you for another day or two, and with company, no less." "It's a long story, Tom. We could use some breakfast and a word with your father, if he's available." Tom nodded, eyeing Henrietta with undisguised curiosity. "Pa's in the house. Ma's just getting breakfast on the table. You two look like you could use it." They followed Tom to the ranch house, where Samuel Curtis and his wife, Martha, welcomed them with the easy hospitality of frontier folk. After a hearty breakfast, during which Jake briefly explained their situation, Samuel led them into his study. "Donovan, the rancher said, stroking his gray-streaked beard. "That man's been a thorn in the side of honest folk around here for years. But he's powerful, Jake. Crossing him isn't something to be done lightly." "I understand that, sir," Jake replied. "But I couldn't stand by and let Miss Cole be forced into marriage with him." Samuel nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Henrietta. "And what do you want, young lady? Are you certain you want to defy your stepfather and Mr. Donovan in this manner?" Henrietta straightened in her chair, meeting the rancher's gaze steadily. "I am, Mr. Curtis. I know the risks, but I will not marry that man. If you're unwilling to help us, I understand, but I won't change my mind." A smile creased Samuel's weathered face. "You've got spirit, Miss Cole. Reminds me of Martha when I first met her. He turned back to Jake. You can stay here for now. We'll put Miss Cole in the guest room. But Donovan won't give up easily, especially if there's money involved. He paid my stepfather $15,000 for me, Henrietta said quietly. A bride price, essentially. Samuel whistled low. That's a significant sum. Donovan must want you badly. It's not about wanting her, Jake said, his voice tight with anger. It's about ownership. Donovan collects things: land, businesses, people. He doesn't care about them beyond the fact that they belong to him. Well, he doesn't own Miss Cole, Samuel stated firmly. And he won't, as long as she's under my roof. Henrietta felt tears of gratitude spring to her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Now, both of you need rest. We can discuss our next steps later. Martha showed Henrietta to a small but comfortable bedroom, providing her with a clean nightgown and promising to help mend her torn dress. As soon as she was alone, Henrietta sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by exhaustion and relief. She was safe, at least for now, and Jake was nearby. The thought brought an unexpected warmth to her chest. In the short time she had known him, he had shown more concern for her welfare than any man she had ever met. He had risked his life and his livelihood to help a stranger, asking nothing in return. As she drifted off to sleep, Henrietta found herself wondering what it would be like to know such a man better, to explore the connection she felt growing between them, unexpected but undeniable. Jake settled into the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands, his body weary but his mind racing. He had acted on impulse when he rescued Henrietta, driven by a simple sense of right and wrong. But now, with time to reflect, he recognized that his feelings were more complex. There was something about her courage in the face of fear, her quiet dignity despite her circumstances, that had touched something deep within him. He had spent years avoiding entanglements, focusing on his work and the freedom of the open trail. Yet now, he found himself drawn to this woman in a way he couldn't easily explain or dismiss. He fell into an uneasy sleep, his dreams filled with images of Henrietta's amber eyes and the feel of her in his arms as they rode through the darkness. The next day brought unwelcome news. A rider from town arrived at the Curtis Ranch with word that Maxwell Donovan had posted a substantial reward for information leading to the return of his kidnapped fiancée and the capture of the outlaw who had taken her. $500, Samuel said grimly as they gathered in his study. That's enough to turn a lot of heads in these parts. And he's convinced the sheriff that I've been kidnapped? Henrietta asked, dismayed. According to the notice, yes. Your stepfather is backing his story, claiming you were taken against your will. Jake paced the room, frustration evident in every line of his body. So now I'm wanted for kidnapping. That complicates things. Indeed it does, Samuel agreed. You can't stay here indefinitely. Sooner or later, someone will talk, reward or no reward. And when Donovan finds you, he'll use the law to get what he wants. What can we do? Henrietta asked, her voice steady despite the fear that churned in her stomach. Samuel exchanged a glance with Jake before answering. There's a judge in Fort Benson, about 2 days' ride from here. Judge Harmon is known for his fairness and integrity. If you could get to him, explain your situation, he might be able to help, perhaps grant you some legal protection from being forced into this marriage. 2 days' ride through territory where everyone will be looking for us, Jake pointed out. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, son, Samuel replied. Martha and I will help you prepare. You can leave tonight, under cover of darkness. That evening, as Martha helped Henrietta pack supplies for the journey, the older woman offered some unexpected advice. That young man cares for you, she said, carefully folding a spare dress she had altered to fit Henrietta. I've known Jake Pierce for 3 years now, and I've never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you. Henrietta felt a blush warm her cheeks. We barely know each other. Sometimes that doesn't matter, Martha said with a knowing smile. Sometimes you just know when someone is right for you. Samuel and I decided to marry after knowing each other for just 2 weeks. That was 30 years ago, and I've never regretted it for a moment. Even out here, with all the hardships. Henrietta asked, genuinely curious. Especially out here. The frontier has a way of stripping away pretense. You see people as they truly are. Martha patted Henrietta's hand. And Jake Pierce is one of the good ones. Later, as they prepared to leave, Jake found Henrietta standing on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, coming to stand beside her. "As ready as I can be," she replied. "Jake, I want to thank you for everything you've done. You had no obligation to help me, and you've risked so much." "I'd do it again," he interrupted, his voice firm. In a heartbeat. Their eyes met in the darkness, and Henrietta felt that same flutter in her chest that she had experienced when she first saw him at the way station. Before she could respond, Samuel joined them, carrying a rifle. "The horses are ready," he said. "I've packed enough supplies for 4 days, just to be safe. Stick to the trail I showed you, Jake. It's longer than the main road to Fort Benson, but you're less likely to encounter trouble." They said their goodbyes to the Curtis family, then mounted the fresh horses Samuel had provided Jake on a sturdy bay gelding, and Henrietta on a gentle mare. Thunder would remain at the ranch, where he could rest and not be recognized. As they rode away from the safety of the ranch, Henrietta felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was still in danger, still pursued, but for the first time in years, she was making her own choices, determining her own fate. And she wasn't alone. They traveled through the night, keeping to the less traveled paths that Samuel had recommended. Jake was a skilled guide, navigating by the stars when the trail became unclear. By dawn, they had covered a significant distance, entering a region of broken hills and scattered pine forests. "We should rest during the hottest part of the day," Jake suggested as they watered the horses at a small creek. "Travel again in the evening and through the night." Henrietta agreed, grateful for the chance to rest her still tender ankle. They made a simple camp in a sheltered hollow, using a fallen log as a backrest as they shared a meal of dried beef and biscuits. "Tell me about yourself," Henrietta said as they ate. "You know my story, but I know very little about you." Jake was quiet for a moment, considering her request. "Not much to tell, really. My father was a cavalry officer, killed during the war. My mother raised me and my younger sister on her own, running a small boarding house in St. Louis. When I was 18, I headed west, looking for something. Adventure, maybe, or just a different kind of life than what I'd known." "And did you find it?" she asked. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I found something, all right. Found out I had a way with horses that most men don't. Found work that I enjoy and that allows me to be my own man. Found the kind of freedom you can't get in the city." "It sounds wonderful," Henrietta said wistfully. "To be so independent." "It has its moments," Jake admitted. "But it can be lonely, too. Riding from job to job, never putting down roots." He glanced at her, then away. "Lately, I've been thinking it might be nice to have something more permanent. A place of my own, maybe. A horse ranch." "That sounds like a fine dream," Henrietta said softly. "I hope you achieve it. What about you? What would you do if you weren't being forced to marry Donovan?" Henrietta considered the question. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to dream of a future of her own choosing. "I've always loved books," she said finally. "When my father was alive, he encouraged my education. I thought perhaps I might become a teacher someday." "You'd be good at it," Jake said, and the simple confidence in his voice made her heart swell. "How do you know that?" "Just a feeling. You have a kind of patience about you. And strength. Those are good qualities for a teacher." They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts as the afternoon heat settled around them. Henrietta found her eyes growing heavy, and she dozed against the log, only to be awakened by Jake's hand on her arm. "Someone's coming," he whispered, his expression tense. Henrietta sat up, instantly alert. In the distance, she could hear the sound of approaching riders, several of them, by the sound. "How did they find us?" she whispered. "I don't know, but we need to move. Now." They quickly gathered their supplies and mounted their horses, moving deeper into the forest as quietly as possible. The sound of the riders grew louder, then faded as they passed along the main trail below their position. "That was close," Henrietta breathed once the danger had passed. "Too close," Jake agreed. "They're searching this area systematically. We need to change our route." They continued through the afternoon, pushing harder than they had planned. By evening, they had reached the edge of a small settlement, little more than a trading post, a saloon, and a handful of cabins. "Coopersville," Jake explained. "Not much of a town, but there's a telegraph office. Donovan will have sent his men here to watch for us." "So we go around?" Jake studied the settlement thoughtfully. "No, That would take too long. We need to go through, but carefully. After dark, when most folks are in the saloon. They waited in the shelter of the trees until night fell, then approached the settlement from the north. As Jake had predicted, the saloon was busy, light and music spilling from its windows. The rest of the small town was quiet. Stay close, Jake murmured as they rode slowly along the back of the buildings, keeping to the shadows. They had almost made it past the settlement when a door opened ahead of them, spilling light across their path. A man stepped out, silhouetted against the brightness from inside. "Hold it right there," he called, raising a shotgun. "Who's that?" Jake tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his revolver. Henrietta held her breath, fear freezing her in place. The man stepped forward, his face becoming visible in the moonlight, a middle-aged man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. "I said, who's there?" "Just travelers, Sheriff," Jake replied, keeping his voice calm and friendly. "Passing through." The sheriff squinted at them suspiciously. "Kind of late for traveling, isn't it? And keeping to the back ways, too. Almost like you don't want to be seen." "Just trying not to disturb anyone, sir," Jake said. "We're hoping to make a few more miles before we camp for the night." The sheriff studied them for a long moment. "You two match the description of some folks I've been asked to keep an eye out for. A kidnapped woman and the man who took her." Henrietta felt panic rise in her throat, but before she could speak, Jake replied smoothly. "Well now, Sheriff, do we look like kidnappers and victims to you? My wife and I are just heading to Fort Benson to visit her sister." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Your wife, you say? What's your name, madam?" Henrietta swallowed hard and forced a smile. "Mrs. Jake Pierce, sir. And you are?" "Sheriff Miller." He still looked suspicious, but his shotgun lowered slightly. "If you're married, where are your wedding rings?" Jake chuckled easily. "Had to sell them last winter when times got hard. Planning to buy new ones when our luck turns." The sheriff considered this, then nodded slowly. "All right, but I'm going to have to ask you to come inside, just to answer a few questions." Henrietta and Jake exchanged a glance, both knowing that entering the sheriff's office would be disastrous. If he sent a telegraph to verify their identities, or if Donovan's men were nearby. "I'm afraid we really need to be on our way, Sheriff," Jake said, his hand still near his gun. "My wife's sister is expecting us." The standoff might have ended badly if not for a sudden commotion from the saloon shouting, followed by the sound of breaking glass and a gunshot. The sheriff turned instinctively toward the noise, and in that moment of distraction, Jake made his move. "Ride," he hissed to Henrietta, spurring his horse forward. They galloped past the startled sheriff and out of the settlement, ignoring his shouts behind them. Henrietta bent low over her mare's neck, her heart pounding with fear and exhilaration. They rode hard for several miles before Jake finally signaled for them to slow down. "That was too close," he said grimly. "The sheriff will send word to Donovan. We need to reach Fort Benson before they catch up to us." They pushed on through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Dawn found them crossing a high ridge. The landscape below them spread out like a vast patchwork quilt of forests, meadows, and rocky outcroppings. "Fort Benson is just beyond that next range of hills," Jake said, pointing to the distance. "We should reach it by nightfall if we keep a steady pace." Henrietta nodded, too exhausted for words. The strain of the journey and the constant fear of capture were taking their toll. But beneath the fatigue was a growing certainty that she was doing the right thing, fighting for her freedom, for her future. And there was something else, too, a deepening awareness of the man beside her. Jake Pierce had become more than her rescuer. He was her partner in this desperate adventure. His courage, his kindness, his unwavering support had awakened feelings in her that she had never expected to experience. As they descended from the ridge, the trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file. Jake took the lead, vigilant for any sign of danger. They had gone perhaps a mile when he suddenly reined in his horse, raising his hand in warning. "What is it?" Henrietta whispered, guiding her mare to a halt beside him. Jake pointed silently to the trail ahead, where the distinct imprints of multiple hoofprints were visible in the soft earth. "Riders," he said quietly. "At least 5 or 6, heading the same way we are. And recently, 2 of the tracks are fresh. Donovan's men? Could be. Or just travelers. But we can't take the risk." He studied the surrounding terrain, then pointed to a steeper path that branched off to the left. We'll go that way. It's rougher going, but it might help us avoid an ambush. The alternate route was indeed more challenging, winding up through rocky terrain that tested both riders and horses. By midday, they had reached a high plateau where a stand of aspens provided welcome shade. They dismounted to rest, allowing the horses to graze on the sparse grass. "How's your ankle?" Jake asked as Henrietta stretched her legs. "Better," she replied, though in truth it still ached after so many hours in the saddle. "I'll manage." Jake studied her with concern. "You're exhausted. We should rest here for a while." Henrietta wanted to argue, to insist that they press on, but she knew he was right. She was swaying on her feet with fatigue. "Just for a little while," she conceded. They secured the horses and found a comfortable spot beneath the trees. Jake spread his coat for Henrietta to sit on, then settled beside her, his back against a tree trunk. "Try to sleep," he suggested. "I'll keep watch." Henrietta nodded gratefully and closed her eyes. Despite her anxiety, exhaustion quickly pulled her under, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke to Jake's hand gently shaking her shoulder. The quality of light had changed. It was later in the afternoon, and the shadows were lengthening. "We need to move," he said urgently. "Riders coming up the main trail. They've split up, some of them taking the path we're on." Henrietta scrambled to her feet, all traces of sleepiness vanishing in an instant. "How far behind us?" "Not far enough. We need to find another route." They mounted quickly and continued along the plateau, looking for a way down that wouldn't take them back to the main trail. The terrain became increasingly difficult, with loose shale and steep drops that forced them to proceed with caution. As they rounded a bend, Henrietta's mare suddenly shied, startled by a snake crossing the path. The horse reared, and Henrietta, caught off guard, lost her grip on the reins. She fell backward, tumbling off the edge of the narrow trail. "Henrietta!" Jake's shout seemed to come from very far away as she rolled down the steep slope, unable to stop her descent. Pain exploded in her head as she struck something hard, and then darkness claimed her. When she regained consciousness, she was lying on level ground, Jake's worried face hovering above her. "Thank God," he breathed when he saw her eyes open. "Don't move. You might have broken something." Henrietta blinked, trying to clear her vision. "What happened? You fell. Rolled all the way down the slope. I thought." His voice broke slightly. "I thought I'd lost you." She moved experimentally, wincing at the various aches and pains that made themselves known. "I don't think anything's broken. Just bruised." Jake helped her sit up slowly. They were at the bottom of the slope, in a small ravine sheltered by overhanging rocks. The horses were nearby, secured to a stunted pine. "How long was I unconscious?" Henrietta asked, touching a tender spot on her temple where blood had dried. "Not long. A few minutes. I got you down here as quickly as I could." He offered her his canteen. "Drink. You need water." As she drank, Henrietta became aware of voices echoing from above, men calling to each other, searching. "They're up there," she whispered, fear clutching at her heart. Jake nodded grimly. "Donovan's men. They saw the horse rear. They know we're somewhere below. What do we do now?" "We need to keep moving. There's a way through this ravine that should lead us toward Fort Benson. Can you ride?" Henrietta nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. Every part of her body protested as Jake helped her to her feet and over to her mare. With his assistance, she managed to mount, gritting her teeth against the pain. They moved carefully through the ravine, the walls of rock on either side providing some cover from the searchers above. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, casting long shadows that both hindered and helped their progress, making it harder to see the path ahead, but also making them less visible to their pursuers. As they emerged from the ravine into a broader valley, Jake pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance, silhouetted against the setting sun. "Fort Benson," he said, relief evident in his voice. "We're almost there." But their relief was short-lived. From behind them came the sound of hoofbeats, riders descending into the valley from the trail above. "They've spotted us," Jake said grimly. "We need to make a run for it." They spurred their tired horses into a gallop, racing across the open ground toward the distant town. The riders behind them gained steadily, their fresher mounts closing the gap with each passing minute. "We're not going to make it," Henrietta said, desperation in her voice as she looked back at their pursuers, 5 men, all armed, with Bartholomew in the lead. "Yes, we will," Jake replied with grim determination. He pulled his revolver from its holster. "Keep riding. Don't stop for anything. Head straight for the courthouse. It's the big building with the cupola. Ask for Judge Harmon." "What are you going to do?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Buy you some time." Before she could protest, he added, "Go, Hattie. Trust me." The use of her nickname, spoken with such emotion, broke through her resistance. She nodded once, then drove her heels into her mare's flanks, urging the tired animal to greater speed. Behind her, she heard Jake rein in his horse and turned to face the oncoming riders. The sound of gunshots echoed across the valley, but she didn't look back, focusing all her energy on reaching the town. The mare's stride began to falter as they approached the outskirts of Fort Benson. The poor animal was at the end of her strength, but Henrietta urged her on with gentle words and a firm hand. They clattered down the main street, drawing curious stares from townspeople who stopped to watch the disheveled woman racing toward the courthouse. Henrietta reined in at the steps of the imposing building, practically falling from the saddle in her haste. Her legs nearly gave way as she stumbled up the steps and through the doors, her eyes wild as she searched for help. A startled clerk looked up from his desk. "Madam, are you all right?" "Judge Harmon," she gasped. "I need to see Judge Harmon immediately. It's a matter of life and death." The clerk hesitated, clearly taken aback by her appearance and urgency. "The judge is in his chambers, but please," Henrietta begged, tears streaming down her face. "They're coming. They'll kill him if you don't help us." Something in her desperate plea must have convinced the clerk, for he nodded and hurried down a hallway, gesturing for her to follow. He knocked on a heavy wooden door, then opened it without waiting for a response. "Judge Harmon, sir, forgive the interruption, but this young woman is in some kind of trouble." The judge, a tall man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, looked up from his desk with a frown that quickly turned to concern when he saw Henrietta's state. "My dear, what on earth has happened to you?" In halting words, Henrietta explained her situation: the forced marriage, Jake's rescue, their flight, and the pursuit. "They're right behind me," she finished. "And Jake, he stayed behind to hold them off. He could be hurt, or worse." Judge Harmon's expression grew increasingly grave as she spoke. When she mentioned Maxwell Donovan, his eyes narrowed. "I know Donovan," he said, "and I know his reputation. You were right to come to me." He rose from his desk and strode to the door, calling for his clerk. "Thomas, send for the marshal immediately. Tell him to gather his deputies and meet me at the entrance to town. There's likely to be trouble." To Henrietta, he said, "Wait here, Miss Cole. I'll see to your friend and deal with your pursuers. You have my word that you will not be forced to marry against your will. That's not how we do things in this territory, regardless of what your stepfather may believe." Henrietta sank into a chair, overwhelming relief warring with fear for Jake's safety. "Thank you, Your Honor. But please hurry. Jake." "We'll find him," the judge promised, and then he was gone, his long strides carrying him swiftly from the room. The next hour was the longest of Henrietta's life. She paced the judge's chambers, alternating between hope and despair. What if Jake had been killed? What if Bartholomew and Donovan's men had caught him? The thought was unbearable. She was standing at the window, watching the street below, when the door opened behind her. She turned, expecting to see the clerk or perhaps Judge Harmon. Instead, Jake Pierce stood in the doorway, his shirt torn and bloody, a bruise darkening one side of his face, but very much alive. "Jake!" she cried, crossing the room in an instant. Without thinking, she threw herself into his arms, tears of relief flowing freely. I was afraid." His arms encircled her, holding her close. "I'm all right," he murmured into her hair. "A few scratches, nothing more." She pulled back slightly to look at him, her hands coming up to frame his face. "What happened?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I led them on a merry chase, but they caught up to me at the edge of town. Things might have gone badly if Judge Harmon and the marshal hadn't arrived when they did." His expression sobered. "Your stepfather and 2 of Donovan's men have been arrested for attempted murder. The judge wants to speak with us both when you're ready." "In a moment," Henrietta said softly. "First, there's something I need to tell you." Jake looked down at her, a question in his eyes. When I thought I might have lost you, she continued, her voice trembling slightly, I realized something. These past few days, as terrible and frightening as they've been, have also been the most alive I've ever felt. And that's because of you, Jake. You gave me more than freedom, you gave me courage. You showed me what it means to fight for something you believe in. Jake's arms tightened around her. Hattie, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You had that courage all along. You just needed the chance to find it. Perhaps, she conceded. But I found something else, too. Something I wasn't looking for, but now can't imagine living without. And what's that? He asked, though the tenderness in his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. You, she said simply. I found you, Jake Pierce. And if you'll have me, I don't ever want to let you go. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deepening with the release of all the fear and longing that had built between them during their dangerous journey. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I think, Jake said, his forehead resting against hers, that we should go speak with the judge. And then, if you're willing, I'd like to discuss the possibility of a different kind of marriage than the one you were running from. Henrietta smiled, her heart fuller than she had ever thought possible. I'm willing, she replied. More than willing. Judge Harmon was as good as his word. He declared that Henrietta was a free woman, not subject to any marriage contract arranged without her consent. Bartholomew was charged with kidnapping and attempted murder, ensuring he would never again have any control over Henrietta's life. As for Maxwell Donovan, the judge promised to look into his affairs more closely, suggesting that the wealthy businessman might soon find himself answering for more than just his role in this particular incident. 2 weeks later, in the small church in Fort Benson, Henrietta Cole became Henrietta Pierce. The ceremony was simple but joyful, attended by Samuel and Martha Curtis, who had journeyed from their ranch to support the couple, and presided over by Judge Harmon himself. As they exchanged vows, Henrietta thought of the strange, twisted path that had led her to this moment, from a carriage bearing her toward an unwanted marriage, to the arms of the man who had freed her, not just from that fate, but from a lifetime of allowing others to determine her destiny. Later, as they rode away from the church, Jake turned to his new wife with a smile. Where to now, Mrs. Pierce? Henrietta considered the question, feeling the weight of true choice for the first time in her life. Wherever the trail takes us, she replied, as long as we're together. And so they rode toward the horizon, not as captive and rescuer, but as partners, equals in love and adventure, their future as wide and promising as the frontier itself.